Hello, and welcome to Jung at Harp. This is a series of conversations between myself, Deborah Henson-Conant, and Kathleen Wiley, who is a Jungian analyst, and it's about the place where music and Jungian analysis meet. In this series, we're talking about the 7 strings of creative resonance. I call it the 7 strings of passion, from a project I have called 7 Strings of Passion, which is a book, it's a concert, it's a class, and it's all about the exploration of creative expression and how to bring it into our lives and what purpose creative expression has in our lives. And today, Kathleen and I are talking about the 3rd string in these principles, and that is the string of character. And I just want to say that I talk about these as strings, or I think of them as strings, because as a harpist, and Kathleen and I both play the harp, as a harpist, I have observed that while each string is a separate note, all those notes work together. And in a harp in particular, they resonate. So when they ring, they resonate within themselves, but they also resonate each other, and they also resonate the instrument, and they resonate everything around them. And I began to observe that that happens within us as well. They're resonating within us. And then I started thinking even deeper about that, about how everything we do resonates in us, and then we resonate through it. And sometimes strings can get distorted, and I'm assuming that, and then they will sound very, very weird and not like their sort of true state. And I'm assuming that that is a lot of what Kathleen ends up dealing with in people, but I may be projecting there.
You're absolutely right, DHC. I sometimes tell people when they come to me and they say, or people ask me, who do you work with? I say, people like you and me. I said, the signal's coming into the station, but there's a little bit of static. So we're going to do some work to get the static off, so you can stay tuned into the clear signal.
Wow, that's great. Oh, okay, right. So then the music that you're trying to express in your life is actually coming through as you meant it.
As you meant it, and from your heart and soul. So it's coming through, not distorted through all the learned, adaptive, internalized patterns, but it's coming through from the essence of who you were born to be, which I think is part of what the strings of passion help people get at in their music.
Okay, so I see that we keep coming back to this, of course, which is, that there is sort of an us, and this comes to character. So like, what is character? And I'm always thinking about that, because character and roles, roles is the 4th string, and the strings aren't always in order. I mean, they all play together, but we often have roles in life. We play like a baseball game. There's an umpire, there's a pitcher, there's a catcher. That's a role. We play roles in life, and the roles, to a certain extent, will help us decide what our character is. I mean, I don't know, whatever, but even within that role, our personal character starts infusing that role.
Yes, and what I think about, and even as you're talking about like the baseball analogy, but if we think also about I think about the music, is that the character for me is really the emotional tone or the quality. So the character of one's personality, or when we say about a person, oh, he's such or she's such a character, it's usually because there's something colorful, which implies some kind of emotion or passion that they tend to move through life with and bring wherever they go, and just kind of share it all over the place, And so I think when I think about the difference between character and roles, part of what I think about is the character is the felt sense of the role.
As you're talking, as you said the word color, I saw the word spectrum, and then I also thought about a coloring book where you can have a figure, and then you can bring the color, you can color in a coloring book. And I'm thinking that, when we get a role, it's almost like it's black and white, what the role is that we're given. I'm a bass player, or I'm the accompanist, or whatever like that. And then we bring in the spectrum that has no harsh lines to it.
Right. Yeah.
I was thinking about that because I was thinking about the role of being an accompanist versus being a soloist as a musician. And I realized that as an accompanist, I'm going to play differently. I'm going to play in a way that's going to enhance, hopefully, the singer. It's going to support the singer. It's going to enhance them. It's going to create the whole, the color around them, the atmosphere around them.
Right.
And any accompanist, anyone who's accompanying is going to do that, hopefully.
Mm-hmm.
And then comes the character of how I do that.
Right, right. You infuse something of your own felt sense of the role, of your own emotional embodied sensory connection to the role. And that comes through as the character. And part of what we want in terms of our own psychological and spiritual work and growth is that we can really let that felt sense of our own true being, of our own inner deepest nature or highest nature, inform the roles that we're in versus doing the role as we've been taught to do it, or as someone else does it, or as it's imposed on us. So connecting with that deep felt sense, I love that word. That's a word that actually Gendlin from the University of Chicago coined, and I just love it. It's like an embodiment that's sensory but also is emotional. And when you have the felt sense, it's like you're just right there with yourself,
right,
in the moment.
Right, and I'm going to want to talk about how we do that.
Mm-hmm.
And I also know that we can also get into a sense of character that we don't want to have, like the character of victim or the character of being less than, and that can then infuse. Now, so I would love to hear your take on all of that. And I will say that one of the experiments that I'm doing right now in my life, as I'm on an experiment to really discover who I am not as a musician. I've spent my life exploring myself as a musician and finding that character. And now I'm doing it by doing a little tiny video each night, like 3 minutes, where I'm just talking about what I've experienced that day, or something I notice about myself, or and I'm just sharing it with one friend. That's it, because it's so scary. But I would love to know how we can go about finding ourselves or finding our true character. I mean, I know that's like, yeah, that's a novel. Finding our true character and finding our not true character.
Well, that's an interesting question. From a perspective of Jungian psychology, we have all characters within our psyche, because part of our makeup, our phylogenetic makeup, is that we have access to every existing energy, every existing emotional state, so that's every existing character. And that what tends to happen is the ones that we live out, that become more our personality, are the ones that get activated in outer world relationships, particularly when those first 4 to 5 years of life. But I think part of the key to your question about what do we do when the characters we don't want come up, like the victim, my favorite analogy is that we invite them to the conference room of our heart. We give them a place at the table, we let them have their say, and then they have to be quiet and listen to the rest of the parts of us have their say, and they don't get to be in charge.
Aha.
So from a point of Jungian psychology, it really is about being in relationship to all of the characters within us, and that being in conscious relationship, that somehow the negative effects are mitigated.
Wow. So what I think I hear you saying is we don't necessarily have to do anything to get rid of them.
Right.
But it's all about acknowledging them, giving them a seat at the table, giving them a place.
Yes.
So that they don't take over everything. This is where so they have a place they belong.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, because the harder we try to get rid of something, it's like trying to talk yourself out of depression, or talk yourself out of anxiety, or talk yourself out of feeling victimized. It just gets bigger. I mean,
Right.
it's like it never works.
Right.
But when we can begin to sit with it and say, okay, tell me what you want me to know. Where's this rooted at? You know, what's this really about? What is it you need from me? Then something begins to happen. There's an energy exchange. Because from the perspective of Jungian psychology, the whole work is about wholeness. So if, for instance, I can integrate my victim, then what I'm going to have is a whole lot of connection to my own personal power and self-agency, because that's what's hidden under the cloak of victim.
Okay, let's take that apart a little bit.
Okay.
And then I'd love to see if I can relate it to music and things that people might struggle with music. But so, okay, so you just said if I can integrate my victim.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Tell me more.
Well, every quote problematic part of ourself has within it the seed of the cure, so to speak. That within the victim is the very energy that's needed to not be the victim. Okay.
Yeah.
So if, for instance, as we're talking about it, and this is just kind of a generic, that we're saying that what happens when one is a victim is one gets disconnected from one's sense of personal agency, one's own ability to make decisions and act on their own behalf and affect change for themselves.
So they feel disempowered.
They feel disempowered. That's a great way of saying it. So if you invite your victim to the conference room in your heart and begin to engage with them, then what you're ultimately getting access to is your own empowerment, your own ability to use your choices, use your attitude, use your actions in a way that empowers you, that takes a step towards what you want.
Right. And if we're not inviting that to the table, I know that we can engage with other people, and it's almost like we put them in a role that will let us experience this role over and over and over again. And
absolutely.
So we're so clever.
Yeah, it's one of those unconscious dynamics. It's, we project these parts of ourselves onto other people, so that really anyone we're encountering some face of our own self.
Right.
Yeah.
Or the thing that lets us play that part of ourselves. That
part of ourselves. The opposite of it. So we attract someone who has an over-the-top sense of personal master and agency that they impose on other people. So it's like they end up using the energy of our personal power that we've given up in order to be over the top, extreme, imposing their will on other people.
I see, but we're actually giving that to them so that we can have this feeling of,
but it's all unconscious. It's not that we consciously do it or even are aware. It's an unconscious dynamic that has to do.
I'm assuming we do it because, well, I'm just going to speak for myself.
Yeah.
When I think I do things like that, it's because there's something I'm scared to do.
Mm-hmm.
And so if I can set up this dynamic and this drama and this, well, I can't do that. I couldn't do that because of this or whatever it is, technology or whatever. Then I don't have to do that thing that's scary. That's often just more visible than I'm comfortable being.
Well, I'm smiling because Jung says that neurosis is the avoidance of legitimate suffering. And what you just described is a clever way that you avoid the legitimate suffering of struggling with the technology and feeling like maybe feeling ignorant and maybe feeling like you don't have the intellectual capacity.
Right. So, or even actually having it work and dealing with the legitimate suffering of what it's like to actually show up.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So one of the things I noticed when I didn't notice it as a kid, but I noticed it when I went back and sort of deconstructed how I experienced and experimented with music as a kid, is I was given access to pianos. I mean, they were just there in my grandparents' house. And so I would just, and nobody said, this is a piano and it's different than the Lincoln Logs or the other toys. It was just, that's another thing to play with. And so I would play with it and I would make up stories. And then I would have the story, and the story was always a princess and she was in the rain, and I'd play Tinkle, 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 Rain. And then the princess would go down into something, and I would go down the piano, getting deeper, and then I'd be down there, and then there'd be thunder and lightning, and I'd make thunder lightning sounds, and then a monster would come, and then I'd run back up, and then I'd be back in the rain. And as I went back and deconstructed that later on, I realized, okay, so I had an impulse to tell a story. That story became the structure. So impulse is the first string as I see it, structure is the second. And all that music that I played before I knew anything about notes, it was just the way this piano gave me to make sounds, that became the character. I then encharactered this story. And one of the reasons that's important to me to go back and look at that is that it helped me see that people can create musical experiences, maybe even peak musical experiences, with very little technical knowledge or ability, as long as we know how to inhabit or we're willing to inhabit the thing that we're working with. Like, even if we only have 2 fingers, but we're not worried about what we don't have and we're using what we have, we can create that experience. And this is important to me. And character seems to be what everything else needs to support. I mean, this impulse is fine. It's an impulse, but the structure is just a structure. It's not, it doesn't give anything. I tell you a structure, it doesn't give you anything. But as soon as I add character to a story, you are seeing another human.
Well, there's an aliveness.
Right.
I mean, even as you described what you did on the piano with your princess story, there's an aliveness, and that aliveness has different, to go back to the spectrum, it has a different color or feeling that gets expressed. So that the structure allows the expression of the feeling. That's the character.
The structure allows the expression, so the structure supports the expression of the feeling, which is the human experience.
Right, the aliveness, the character.
That we share, right. And I Frankenstein is one of my favorite stories, the actual book. And I just know that there, well, I won't go deep into that, but just what makes something alive, what really makes it alive is that it has personality. Now, that's probably not true, or wait a minute, does everything have personality?
I guess it depends on how you define personality.
Okay, all right. Maybe I'm going down a little thing here because I'm like, does a paramecium have personality? I don't know. Oh, and is it?
I mean, I think if we wanted to speak more in kind of the, I mean, we could say everything has its own kind of energetic vibration that thus gives off a certain felt sense or felt state of consciousness. It's like, which we could call a personality. I mean, I'm thinking even about environments, how different environments have different characters.
Right.
And that there's something about the environments that just kind of exude a certain character or certain feeling tone.
Right. And harmony, I don't know if this would sound, but I mean, I don't know if this will make sense, and this might be too loud, and I also haven't tuned this, but a different harmony can make a complete difference in how, I don't even think this is on.
Yeah, it's not plugged in.
Or it's not turned on. Let's see. Can you hear that now?
Yes, I can hear
like
it now.
The difference between twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are. The difference between that and twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are. Now, I know there's a difference between those two things.
And how do you know that? Let's just play with this for a minute. How do you know there's a difference?
Well, I can feel the difference.
That's it. You
And,
feel
right.
it.
And
Yeah.
in the first one, I feel boxed, a little boxed in.
Mm-hmm.
And in the second one, I mean, I feel like there's potential, and I could go somewhere in the first one. I don't know where I'm going. But in the second one, I feel like, well, for one thing, I feel like I'm expressing
Mm-hmm.
myself more. I'm expressing what I love
Mm-hmm.
and a kind of harmony that I love.
Mm-hmm.
So that brings me to a big question that I have is, as we start to develop and express our character, we're sharing what we love.
Yes.
And that seems to be scary, especially if we're not adept at it. For example, there's a piece that I wrote called Catcher in the Rye. I mean, it was, I didn't call it, yeah, I wrote Catcher in the Rye. I wrote a piece for Symphony called Catcher in the Rye, based on the story. And Catcher in the Rye. And it has this huge timpani solo in it, and it's really dramatic. And I had a vision of it, how I wanted it to be. And when I first shared it with somebody, it wasn't even close to that vision.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember I was just playing it for like 5 people, and someone in the audience just went, and that killed it. The whole thing went underground for 10, 15 years. I was so scared, because I was sharing something that was so deeply important to me, something I was trying to do. Later on, I saw a timpanist who was just a powerful timpanist, and I thought about it again, and I rewrote it, and I wrote it for him. And then I was able to perform it with Symphony Orchestra, and it is this really powerful piece.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it was a really powerful piece in my head at first, but I was not able to express it. And so this beautiful thing that I was loving, I put it out there, it got denigrated totally unintentionally, and it was so scary it went back. And I bet people experience that all the time.
Oh, it's what happens to children all the time. I mean, this is what really sets in motion our early wounds, is where the caregivers inadvertently shame us when we're so little for just what's natural expression. And it's, unfortunately, it just seems to be part of the socialization process. And sometimes it's more damaging than others, but I think what you're talking about, it's something that the outer event was painful, but what kept the Catcher in the Rye underground for 10 or 15 years was that there was something it grabbed hold of in your own psyche that then it like fueled your psyche. It like gave it a nitrous charge. And so then something that was already alive in you got bigger. It had more power. Sometimes I say these things are like helium balloons. You can kind of deflate the helium balloon, but they're always waiting for the right amount of air, or the hot air balloon, for the air to come, and then it takes off again. And so your own self-doubt, self-denigration, whatever those feelings might have been, got a burst of hot air, and you were off.
Right. And I was listening to something this morning, and a guy was saying, whoever you are, no matter how much you try to hide it, it's going to come out. I think he was saying that in a negative way, but I was thinking like, oh, that's great. It's great to know it's going to come out. What can we do? I mean, I know some of the things that I have students do to start bringing that out in music. And one of the things is, I have this creativity gym where I have soundscapes of just sounds that would allow them to play, and really encourage them, instead of trying to play a specific piece, to play with that atmosphere.
Right.
to touch into that atmosphere, and to literally touch into it, because you get to touch into the world of music with an instrument that you touch, and being able to listen and play at the same time, and also to invoke and involve our bodies in it, instead of just this, I think it's the notes, the whole, just really feeling that. So those are some of the things that I work with students on, and in the class Strings of Passion, those are some of the things that I have them do. What are the things that you have people do to start bringing the character of who they are into their lives?
Well, the first thing is people have to learn how to listen to what goes on inside of them. So they really have to begin to have some practice that helps them listen. Of course, that happens in analysis with an analyst who is listening deeply and responding, and that thus allows one to more deeply hear oneself. I love journaling. I think that, again, stream of consciousness journaling, not orderly journaling, that has another purpose, but stream of consciousness journaling, again, allows one to see what's going on inside of oneself. Insight meditation, just sitting and naming what's going on, is a great practice. And then once you start to hear what's going on, you have to begin to dialogue with it. And Robert Johnson has a wonderful book called Inner Work that talks about doing active imagination with different parts of oneself. It's as far as I'm concerned, it's a great book. One of the things that I do as a creative project, in addition to harp, is I do some writing of meditations on the Judeo-Christian scriptures, looking at them as symbolic of aspects of our own psyche. So what I always do with those meditations is I give people questions to reflect on and kind of things to track that are related to whatever the energies are in the particular story that we've looked at. So it really is ultimately about being in relationship. That is it. There isn't anything exotic or anything. I mean, it's just that basic. But of course, what we also know is being in relationship is not always that basic.
Right. Well,
I mean, it's a high spiritual art.
Right. I just want to say, I saw those on your web. So you have those on your website, right? Those meditations?
Yes.
So anyone can just go look at them.
Anyone can go look at them. They're available. Yeah.
That's great. So I want to just say an example of something that I noticed the other day in myself that helped me start understanding how to be more in relationship rather than in reaction. So I have technical problems all the time, and I'm part of this technical, think tank or whatever group. And I had a problem, and I went to them and said, what's going on here? And somebody says, you should just call tech support. And I was like, what? That's why I'm in this group, and I just kind of, and then I realized that was rude, and I ended up having to backtrack and apologize, and which ended up taking everything a long time. But the really beautiful thing that happened is that I learned that when I asked a question, I got an answer that seemed like I was being blown off. That was my reaction. That was how I saw it. And it could have been seen that way. The person was actually rushing. And what I didn't know how to do was the next step of collaborative communication, which was to say, could I have, would you be willing to elaborate or give me some details about why you think this problem should be taken to tech support rather than here? I didn't do that. So I was just expecting him to know, like, you better respond to me the way you should.
Right.
And,
right. And that's the crux of all problems in relationship.
Right. Well, and I know it's something I really appreciate in students is when they will keep asking the question that they don't have the answer to, instead of just being, well, I didn't get that. So it sounds like you're talking. So I got this question, which I realized, aha. Anytime I'm triggered by feeling like I'm being blown off or I didn't get the answer that I needed, instead of getting huffy, this is my cue to bring out this super question. And I feel like it's almost like I have to do it by rote because I'm so ready to react rather than respond, I kind of have to learn, like, what is the cue that tells me time to respond?
Yeah. Well, developmentally, according to Melanie Klein, who was a British psychoanalyst, she says the first developmental stage in infancy is what she calls the paranoid schizoid phase. And what that basically means is we feel scared and then we withdraw. And if you do infant observation, which sometimes there are programs where psychoanalysts and other helping professionals observe infants to see reactions, you can see when they feel scared, they pull away. So what you did, we might say, is somewhere it triggered some fear, probably a deep fear of inadequacy, or I'm asking for too much, or, and these things are often, they're not cognitive. It's not like you're thinking it. It's like this nebulous feeling state, And so then the instinctive response is to pull back, the schizoid position, the pull back, the kind of wall off, the cut off. And so it's a very primitive response, primitive meaning unconscious, non-rational, and we all have it. And all our lives, no matter how old we are, it can still kick in. And again, when it kicks in, it's information to say, what fear? Where was I scared? What got triggered? To bring compassion to that part of yourself. Then you can go back, and if you want to circle back to the person to say, hey, help me understand, or you may decide, what, maybe that person was right, and I am going to go to tech support. It'll be quicker. I mean, whatever, but you have taken the opportunity to reconnect with a bit of yourself instead of pulling back and maintaining
that position.
Right.
I see what you're saying. So I saw the sort of what happened, that I couldn't have a flow in that situation.
Right.
So I see it in music. So now I want to talk about, we're talking about character.
Okay.
And I love talking about anything. So if we're talking about character, and if we're talking about the role of self-expression in our lives, and we're looking at it from the standpoint of, if we want to play music, what's holding us back from it, and also how can we bring art into our lives to help with all of these. So that's just kind of just going to try to pull it back to that. So I want to just say two things. One is, I noticed that many people feel like, well, three things. One is many people feel like they left art, I just wasn't good at that, or they left it out of their lives, or something like that. How can they bring it back? The second is, people who are bringing it back or coming in, like I work with a lot of people who are being musicians, either after retirement, or it's something they always want to do, or they left it and they're coming back. And there's a lot of hesitation in what they're doing. And then the third thing is just how we can bring the ideas of character and art into our lives in general. And for example, right now, instead of journaling every morning, I'm drawing a picture of how I see myself now, and how I want to see myself, or how I feel myself now and how I want to feel myself. And then I draw a little arrow, like, here, you are here, you're going there. So I guess I just want to kind of get your take on all of those things, which is a lot of things.
So I'm going to start with the drawing, because there was a time in Carl Jung's life where every morning he got up and he drew a mandala. And a mandala is, simply put, a circle that you fill in with colors or shapes that is an expression of the self. It's like an image of a self-portrait in the moment. And the mandala is an ancient tool that has been used in various spiritual traditions throughout the centuries as a centering device, as a device to really help one center and connect with one's deep essence. So I think that, again, the scene of where we are is often the very thing that's needed to free the energy to flow to where we want to be. We tend in our culture to think, oh, I can ego my way through it. If I just do this or that, my ego is in charge and it will happen. And, the ego has its place, and we need ego. And transformation ultimately, for me, is an organic process. that is something that happens naturally. And when I get that, and I realize that the self that I am, at whatever image of the mandala I might have drawn today, that inherent in that is all that's needed to get me to the next step before I'm growing to.
Right, because transformation actually isn't change. I mean, transformation is just when one thing becomes into another state almost. Like I remember seeing fudge transform from being liquid into the solid state. And the magic of that there was a transformation.
There's a transformation. The state changes, the expression changes, the form changes, the cellular consciousness changes.
And yet all the same stuff is there. I mean, it reminds me of those drawings that you look at, and it's a horse and then it's a person with a bonnet on. And that's a kind of, parlor game transformation.
Well, and the other thing you're alluding to is one of the things that Jung also said about the psyche is that the energy is never lost. So for instance, with the Catcher in the Rye, it went underground, but the energy you had for that was not lost. It perked underground, we might say, in the unconscious for years until you saw this timpani player and it came back to the surface.
Right.
So psychic energy is never lost. It just changes its form. It changes its location. So that's what you're talking about. So
yeah, I'm also thinking about, while you're talking, I'm thinking about that Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. And I'm thinking that it was the same instrument. It was the same song. It was the same set of strings, and it was completely different. So if it's possible with that instrument, here's the same person, the same set of experiences, all that, I can be completely different on a moment's notice and completely true. It's not that neither of those were true.
Right. And the key, again, from the perspective of Jungian psychology, to being able to make that change in a moment or in a minute is having conscious access to the energy, i.e. having conscious access to the felt state or the affect of the character, of that part of yourself that you want to express.
Okay. So when I'm playing an instrument, there's a level of technical facility I have to master. But when I'm being myself, there really isn't a level of technical mastery, or is there? Like
well, I would say that the mastery that's needed is being able to know what is one's true self and what isn't. The mastery that's needed is a level of consciousness where one has a sense of self, that this is where I start and stop, and this is what is within me. So I don't know that I would say it's a technical ability, but I call it psychic muscle.
Okay, all right.
There's got to be psychic muscle, and the psychic muscle, as I see it, I use a term that Erich Neumann coined called the ego self-axis, is that we want to build a conscious flow of energy between our ego, our conscious sense of who we are, and the larger self that we are, or our soul's essence. And if we can develop and strengthen that flow of energy consciously, then at any given moment in time, I can drop down from my ego consciousness into a state that is a little more like a meditative, contemplative state of deep listening, and connect with a much larger pool of knowledge, experience, feeling, knowing, life force. Because the ego is always like a dot to the largesse of our psyche soul. It's just like the point on the top of the pyramid, but the base of the pyramid, that's the really essence of who we are, our soul psyche, is humongous compared to the tip of the pyramid that's the ego.
Okay, so let me bring that back to this example. Because I was thinking, after I said that to you, I thought, yeah, there's a technical, you actually don't have to have technical mastery of the instrument. You just have to have some kind of mastery of where you are with the instrument and a willingness to embody where you are. Because even if I could only play one note, I could still have like a twinkle little star, how I wonder, I mean, like, I could, there is no limit to the amount of fun or self-expression that I could have, even with the most limited technical ability. So let's say I have very little self-awareness right now. How can I have fun with that? As I'm thinking of self-awareness as being almost like technical facility.
Yeah, you know, where my mind is going is Jung says that there are 5 instinctive factors in our psyche, and one of those instinctive factors is self-reflection. And the 5th one is creativity, actually. So the 5 instinctive factors, according to Jung, are hunger, sexuality, movement, self-reflection, and creativity. So to answer your question, I think that self-reflection is the key to having creative expression, regardless of what level of self-awareness or consciousness you have. There has to be the ability to see oneself, self-reflection. With music, there is a self-reflection that one sits as the instrument at the harp, and then the heart mirrors what's in the instrument of the heart and soul of the musician. And perhaps at times, the instrument of the harp mirrors what's in this heart and soul that one does not know. That's part of the people being moved by music. The music resonates. It mirrors something that's in them that they've yet to see. And in the music, they see it.
Well, you also just talked about movement. And I just realized that, because my question is basically, how do we use character, emotion, desire, love, to enrich and color any level of technical ability, and at the same time hearing, because that's what's going to help bring us out. And when you talked about movement, I realized that I can either focus on the note, or I can focus on even getting to the note. Like the passion of getting to the note becomes, it can be its own drama, and it can be its own experience for me. So I could imagine that exploring just character with a single note, like the character of tenderness and gentleness and love, and the character of aggression, and not just in playing the note, but in every aspect of it, coming to it, maybe not even touching it, just everything, and everything that happens afterwards too. I mean, like, I could be playing with developing a sense of character, and to the, if I am going to be a performer, the audience doesn't care whether I've moved them or had them help them see humanity in the notes that I play, or the dance that I do, or the words that I say. It's my ego that tells me, oh, I have to be able to do it with just the notes.
Right.
If we bring our whole self.
Well, you're talking about embodiment, and I'm really big on this. I'm really big because there's a lot of practices out there now that really do take people out of their bodies, and we really need to be in our bodies. Embodiment, incarnation is the whole thrust of the Western culture evolution, and the fact that we are a Christian culture. It's about incarnation, embodiment. What you are talking about is embodiment, that the character is the entry point into embodying what it is that one wants expressed in the moment. And just as you've demonstrated for us with Twinkle Twinkle, you embodied different characters, different felt senses in all of those renditions you offered.
Thank you.
But what was beautiful about it was you were embodied, you were in each one. It wasn't a disconnected, oh, I'm just going to do this from the head. You were feeling it in your body and expressing it in your movement.
Wow. I'm thinking about my next show.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking about how I was planning to practice for it, which was, be in physical shape, my hands be in shape. And now that we've had this conversation, I'm thinking of it in a very different way.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking, how much of myself can I explore as I'm preparing for it? How much of it can I reveal?
Mm-hmm.
And then deal with the fear later,
Mm-hmm.
but really practice that embodiment and that character.
Yes.
And what I'm learning from today is that, can you say those 5 things again that you said, the
5 instinctive factors that Jung
hunger
talks
was
about.
first.
Hunger.
Now, does desire go with hunger? Is it
Yes.
just hunger? Okay, so it's hunger.
It's not just physical hunger, but it's yearning. So
Okay.
Hunger, sexuality, which of course is the literal act of sex, but it's also about the desire for connection. And
okay.
That's much bigger than just the physical act of sex.
Okay.
Movement, self-reflection, and creativity.
Wow. So I can bring the heart of all those things into bringing my character out and really making sure that that is what I share
Mm-hmm.
in the next performance.
Yes.
And in my life.
Yes. And doing what I see that you do so well already, but just trusting that if you practice however you practice, then you show up in the moment and you give yourself over to the embodiment of what comes in the moment, of what's created between you and the audience at that moment.
I see. And that's the 5th string, which is the string of practice, which is having a practice. And what I hear you saying right now is all of that work is in the moment of practice. Is my work with myself, although it's going to reflect in my relationships with other people. But and that's one of the beautiful things about having an instrument or an art form, whatever that is. And so you're helping to answer the question, which I'm always asking, which is, why is creativity important? What does it bring to people's lives?
Mm-hmm.
And you're helping me see that the way that I creatively approach my instrument in the next, as I'm preparing, is going to bring character, which is then going to allow me to really embody and be there in a new way and open up new things for my audience. And this is something that every one of us can do. And this is what makes us rich.
Yes, that's right. That's exactly right. Yeah.
That's beautiful. Well, Kathleen, I had like a gazillion other questions, and this was amazing. Is there any last thing that you want to say before we end this session?
I really just want to invite people to be courageous enough to see who they are. Because as you said, sometimes we're scared to see who we are, and that's even in our largesse. It's not just the negatives, but we can be scared of our own strengths and our own talents and our own longings. So I just want to say, be courageous and live from your heart.
That's beautiful. And I want to say to people to really explore the creativity of character with everything you do, whether that's picking up a spoon and enjoying it, or playing an instrument, or speaking to someone. And that's how we can start enriching ourselves and share with us, what you've discovered and what you've heard here.
Yes.
Thank you so much. I really love this. And I look forward to seeing you again next week.
Terrific. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.